It's May 3rd, 2024. I'm with John Jekovich and Claire, and we're about to read some of his book, Their Mother's Son. And we're on page 331, and this chapter is called Passwords, Kia, and Hospital Bound.
Say again?
The chapter is called Passwords, Kia, and Hospital Bound. So here we go. A soldier came up from the village and said there was hot coffee at one of the houses. We could go there with our canteens and fill them up. I woke Lape and told him to stay awake. I was going to get some coffee. I got his canteen along with mine and started to walk to the village. There were riflemen all about in various holes the Germans had left. They too sensed that the worst was over, and at least the rest of the night. As I walked back with the hot coffee, I spotted a leg from the knee down, lying in the road, which was bloodied boot still on his foot. It appeared to be a German from the appearance of the boot. It was a makeshift mess kitchen set up within the confines of a small house that was not completely destroyed. Several field gas stoves were burning, brewing gallons of hot coffee. It was warm inside, and I felt good to where it was to be warm. I lingered for a while, enjoying the coffee. I filled both canteens and started back to the bunker. Lape and I sat crouched in the bunker, drinking the hot coffee, sharing a package of cheese crackers and a candy bar.
What?
Lape and I sat crouched in the bunker, drinking the hot coffee and sharing a package of cheese crackers and a candy bar.
Oh, candy bar.
It was quiet. Even the tanks had settled down and were no longer heard rumbling about. For as long as I knew, Lape would probably went back to our first days at Breckenridge. We never discussed our personal lives or our experiences we shared as a gun crew. Somehow we never had the rapport to sit down and talk naturally about anything. Without any pretentiousness or straining to make a conversation, I could talk freely to Fink and he would reciprocate, but I could not with Lape. I had drunk the entire canteen of coffee while it was still hot, and then stretched out and closed my eyes. I told Lape to wake me before it got light and to stay awake. He nodded and turned to peer out of the firing embrasure. In a few minutes I was sound asleep. The hot coffee had taken the chill away, and I felt warm all over despite laying on the cold ground. I must have been asleep for several hours when I awakened by a rifle fire and a pop of a flare going off. Lape said something about a German patrol being spotted, and a rifle squad was sent out to investigate. Again, the distant fire of an M1 and the rapid fire of a BAR. I checked the gun to be sure it was not frozen, knowing that I could not fire with the friendly troops out there. We were both looking out the embrasure, but could not see or hear anything. I checked my M1 to make sure it was not frozen, slammed a round of ammo into the chamber, and put the safety on. Lape with his .45 would be useless unless they were in the bunker with us, and then it would be too late. A red flare went up about 100 yards to our front. I figured it must have been the German patrol signaling some sort of message. Again, the BAR went off in several short bursts, and everything was quiet. In a few moments, we heard the muffled sound of feet trudging through the snow. I released the safety on my M1 and the sounds got more intense. I could make out several figures coming towards us. A voice shouted, "Don't fire, second squad, second platoon, coming in." I could now make out a dozen figures slowly moving towards us. "Take it easy, guys, the Krauts are long gone," the lead figure muttered as they passed our bunker. They were headed for the kitchen and some hot coffee, not saying anything they had encountered any Germans, or if they had any casualties. I was thankful for the remark that they made about the Germans being out of this sector. At least the rest of one night we could be quiet and we could get some rest. The rest of the night was just as uneventful and quiet. I felt rested having slept several hours and wondered if the kitchen would be serving any breakfast. It was almost dawn and there was considerable movement about our general area. We had gotten the word out that the Germans had pulled out during the night, tanks and all. We thought that this would be a perfect spot to rest up, get resupplied, and obtain some replacements. We were wrong. There was a string of 6x6s, their engines idling, waiting for the load of GIs. We were moving to another sector. We knew that the Germans were being routed and the counteroffensive having been crushed. What we did not know was the extent of the magnitude or the offensive action, which began on the 16th of December and ended some 35 days later. We never heard the term Battle of the Bulge until reading it in the Stars and Stripes much later. We were never informed of the gigantic nature of the operation. Some 600,000 Americans and 500,000 Germans. It was the most decisive battle on the Western Front during World War II and the greatest ever fought by the United States Army. Being green troops, we took to constant moving and being surrounded most of the time by the enemy as part of the nature of combat. Our introduction into combat was quick and decisive and at times fatal. We think we were in the thick of it, all the things right from the beginning. Our saving grace, as compared to the 106th Division, was to be attached to various experienced units rather than slugging it out with the Germans in one large green division. In the course of a little more than a month, I have seen the squad I was in suffer almost 90% casualties, mostly fatalities. This percentage would be repeated several times during the course of the conflict. We did not know the people we were attached to. We were strangers to each other. We were told to fill in there and set up the gun here and move your gun and squad into the woods. We knew neither the situation we were going into nor the end results of our efforts. The people we fought were mostly of a different class structure for me. Most of the time, we were on our own, which was perfectly all right with me. The smaller the unit, the greater chance of survival. We did not have the niceties of the rear echelon units, i.e. warm billets at night, hot food, occasionally, or ample supplies of ammunition and equipment. We never had adequate cold water, clothing, or we were never issued at Breckenridge in October. We utilized during most of the winter months in combats. We marveled at the winter clothing of the German Panzer divisions. For the first month in combat, we received no mail, which was expected, nor did we have the opportunity to send out any. We were never taken off the line to the rear area for showers and a warm place to thaw out. But constantly we're in the midst of mortar barrages and even present Tiger tanks. We endured work without a murmur of disdain and pursued our assigned duties with vigor and strong penchant to persevere. It was a short ride in the open 6x6s, lasting about an hour. We left the trucks in town called Haute Bordeaux, the assembly area for our division. We closed in the assembly area about 300 hours on 11 January, and we're told we were in divisional reserve. In a short ride, thus the far the division had been contributing most of its strength, other divisions to stem the breakthrough into Belgium by the German Panzer divisions. Now together for the first time, the 75th Infantry was ready for an offensive operation. The enemy and skillfully organized commander issued Field Order Number 7. The division attacks tomorrow, 15 January 1945. Hour of attack, 289th Infantry, 0300 hours, 291 Infantry, 0800 hours. The enemy had skillfully organized its defensive positions along the east bank of the Sam River in the vicinity of the village of Hort. It was entrenched heavily with numerous bunkers built by timber, covered with earth and snow. Each bunker contained 3 to 4 men armed with automatic weapons. Also, stone buildings and cellars were being effectively used in the time of Islam, Salmachuto, and Beck. On 14 January, our forces were generally along the west bank of the Somme River, except in the vicinity of the Grand Holuk on the north. 516th Parachute Regiment and the attached to the 82nd Airborne Division had affected a bridgehead in the town. The 291st Infantry occupied the northern section from Neuville to point roughly north of Baslam and Renshaw. We were in the town of Renshaw getting new replacements, some new equipment, and mostly our back mail. I had got 2 letters from home, 3 letters from Jean, and 4 from Anne, all dated before Christmas. I read the letters from home first to see if everything was all right, the usual gossipy, I'm fine stuff. I knew Mother was not saying anything wrong under any circumstances. They said it was cold and the furnace had gone out several times. Other than that, it's a normal except that they were finding foodstuff hard to get or just unavailable. As I started to open the letters to Jean, a runner from the company, CP, informed me that Lieutenant Mancuso wanted to see me. Lieutenant Mancuso, our platoon leader, and second lieutenant also less than a month, he stated he wanted to keep the same arrangements as I would double as a squad leader and occasionally the first gunner, whenever possible. As far as not retaining my stripes, his lame-brain excuse was promotions were hard to come by in the field. How did he get his? The question literally begged for an answer. He stated rather that he would continue to work on my behalf in getting my stripes. We still not have the first sergeant or platoon sergeant, and I thought I listened to his pitiful excuse that nothing had changed since we had left. I viewed promotions as well as awarding of our medals for heroism as mostly political under the circumstances. There were few exceptions, but as a general rule, there were few and far between. I never pressed the issue of promotions, nor did I ever seek them. I was always under the impression that if one really deserved one, he would eventually be rewarded. I know I felt a little bitter during this time. I returned from the hospital to find Larson had made sergeant. I knew he did not have the experience I had acquired at Wits or around Bastogne. He was 10 years older, and I was always relegated to the less strenuous and less arduous tasks. I learned later that it was due mostly to his cousin, battalion headquarters, who aided him considerably. I never confronted him regarding the issue. Although we were on good speaking terms, I never confronted him regarding this issue. After a while, the bitterness faded, in obscurity, and it was regulated to only passing memory of time in my service. We found out that Post was okay, and he had been in a rear echelon position for most of the time we were on the line. He had kept our personal gear in good condition and stockpiled the ammunition and K rations, which he stored in the trailer. I had some of his back mail. He was later delighted to receive it and thanked me profusely. I liked Post very much, and he was happy for that I got through the entire war safely. I would have liked to see him after the war, but deemed it impossible. We really did not have anything in common to hold us together. After the common bond was experienced during the war, there was nothing we could relate to after we had run its course. He was good to be around, and I shall miss him. As I reminisced about Post, I realized that I had not had the inclination to look back at all that happened in the past few weeks. It was time for the reflection and the first respite since leaving Haverford West. I had not thought about Mother or Sally for several weeks, and all my concern for the war welfare had been for naught. The strange aspect of it was that I did not feel remorse, the fact that they were not in my every thought. I was concerned at the time if the furnace was on the cold nights, and if they were handling the snow, getting to work at school okay. They were completely out of my conscious state. Now I knew how Steve and Lookie felt their own concern for anything relating to the immediate family. They just did not consider it a part of their comprehension. Instead, they concentrated on their own self-centered interests. I also reflected I had changed considerably these past several months, not only knowing that I was mature, but my outlook about many things had been transformed to something I still not fully comprehend. What I did fully realize was that I was fortunate enough to return from this. I would not be the same person when I was entering this basic training. We were billeted in a small college that the squad had fixed up quite nicely, considering they had been occupying it for only 2 days. Most of the squad was made up of new replacements we had acquired in the past week. I did not know them very well, and I was slowly developing an aversion to fully become acquainted with them, as it was so painful when they were casualties so early on. It was warm in the cottage with a huge iron stove throwing out much warmth in the center of the small living room. We would sleep on the floor in front of the stove with our bedrolls and consider ourselves fortunate. We also afforded the luxury of 2 hot meals a day, breakfast and dinner. That night after chow, I sat before the huge iron stove and began to read the letters from Anne and Jean. I first read Jean's letter, and they were written as she was speaking to me. They spoke of preparations the family was making for Christmas. The weather had turned colder, but no snow. Also, how much she missed me, not talking to me, and was looking forward to seeing me once again. She talked about her times riding the bicycle, but mostly wrote of the times we sat on benches overlooking the town about many things, also the necking we did. As I read Jean's letter, the things we did together then seemed so far in the distant past, as I happened years ago, not just a few short months ago. I could still recall vividly the many meaningful events with Jean, but somehow they took on a different and almost unreal perspective, as if they never really happened. After reading Jean's fourth and final letter, I laid back and closed my eyes and tried to visualize how she looked the night of the dance. I gradually came back. It was difficult, but the memory was forming a mental picture. It accumulated in sight of her red dress the night of the dance. I held her image for the longest time, dwelling of every little detail. Then it was all gone, vanished as it never was. I was back to lying on the floor in a strange house, warmed by a stove I have never seen until several days ago. Finally, after the longest period, I opened Anne's letters, and there was much of the same in her letters: preparation for the holidays, her schoolwork, the weather turning colder, and then how she missed me and I wished I was back with her. As I read the letters, I could picture the many places in Owensboro we went to, and sometimes at her home, especially the last few days before we shipped out. I could still see every detail of her bedroom and even how she looked that night. But strangely, I did not get the same feeling I got when I read Jean's letters. Jean's letters were much more the same as Anne's, but there was something in Jean's that was lacking in Anne's. Perhaps it was a different culture, perhaps the closest of the war to Jean and not to Anne. Anne's thoughts were much more focused. I am doing well in school, looking forward to becoming a teacher, have picked out and bought all my presents, and so on. She was a definite and was sure of what she wanted, and she was all she at all times. I got the feeling, even reading her letters, that there was no one who could sway her away from anything she set her mind to. I recalled admiring that trait in her back at Owensboro, and also being a little frightened by it. With Jean was different. She had desires and aspirations that I knew with certainty she would achieve. But unlike Anne, there was always weighed with other factors in mind. She wanted to study music desperately, but the desire was always predicated on her parents' situation and welfare. At times, she would reconcile it by going to the library and acquiring some of the knowledge of music there, always keeping it subdued and dispassionate. I dare say her parents probably were aware of it, intense feelings for music, and insatiable thirst for the knowledge regarding it. Perhaps it was different culture of the closeness of the war experience as suggested before, but whatever it was certainly manifested itself under uncertain terms. As I read the letters over, I still came away with the same inner feelings. I did not understand what it, and perhaps I never would, but maybe, just maybe, there was something else directing my subconscious. The next morning we were preparing to move up on the line once again. We left our packs, overcoats, and personal belongings with Post and the Jeep. We moved out along a narrow path in the woods and passed the line of departure, 7,300 hours. Our objective was to seize the high ground north of Aslam. The 1st Battalion, attacked on the right sector, advanced approximately 1,500 yards when Company A on the left was caught in a draw by the enemy machine gun fire, was pinned down. We, the 2nd Battalion, attacked on the left and advanced over open ground for approximately 400 yards before we were pinned down also. Shells began whipping along the draw where A Company was pinned down. There were also some tanks in a defiable position, firing into the draw, and we could hear the screams from our troops as they're receiving rounds of the enemy tanks. There were some medics trying to get to the draw to aid the wounded, but they would get stopped short by a sniper and mortar fire, and the tanks firing directly into the draw. We were about halfway to the draw when we got pinned down, and it was unfortunate that our only protection was a little rise in the ground, which did not afford us much cover. Our battalion battery of the 105s opened up and were concentrating their fire on the tanks and mortars. The pinned down troops A company must have had an artillery observer with them, as I could see the shells being corrected as they attempted to zero in on the tanks. The Germans did not realize that we were about 1,000 yards to the right of the 1st Battalion, for we were not getting much of the concentrated fire from the tanks or mortars. The only heavy support for the German attack was from the tanks and mortars, and they were too busy directing the heavy concentration of fire mainly at the 1st Battalion in the advanced position. The dominant terrain all along our front were the long and quite regular ridges, which run generally in a north-south line. It was these slight ridges that pinned down troops of the 1st Battalion and were executing their escape route. We could see them crawling in the snow, crouching across flat on their feet, flat on their stomachs, to take advantage of the cover the ridges afforded. At the end, they were out of sight of the tanks, and they would stand up and run along the ridge line where it emptied into a deeper draw. From there, we would turn 90 degrees and come out of the wooded area behind us. The thick tree plantation gave them a lot of cover up here, and we would regroup. So there's a lot of trees in those forests there.
Yeah.
It wasn't bare, and a lot of trees.
Yeah.
And what type of trees were they mostly?
What?
What type of trees were they mostly? Evergreens?
Evergreens, yeah.
And about how tall did you say they were?
I say 10, 15, 20 feet.
They were big trees.
Yeah.
You think those trees are still there today?
Right?
You think trees are still at that location today?
Do what?
Do you think today, 80 years later, there's still trees at that location?
Oh, yeah. Unless they tore that all down or had a fire.
Although many used the means of escape, they were unfortunately in the minority. For as long as the German tanks dominated the sector, the 1st Battalion could not move in either direction, forward or to the rear. We did not fire our gun, as we saw no real need to. What would we fire at? A 56-ton Tiger tank? So your guns were basically, that you had, were basically useless to a 56-ton Tiger tank.
Yeah.
So you'd just be wasting your ammo.
Just run out, that's it.
And you become a target.
Well, unless you had armor-piercing shells on them.
And
You could get them down.
But did you have armor-piercing shells?
You get those GIs brought up to the vents and so Molotov cocktails inside those vents.
Suddenly there were white figures darting all over the landscape, 1,000 yards to our right. The Germans were counterattacking our frontal position and leaving for the protective positions to flush out our troops pinned down. The 2nd Battalion was ordered forward to join the 1st in the draw, and the 1st. We reached the draw and set up immediately, firing a few seconds later. The white-clad soldiers kept coming, and we would see many of them fall to the snow-covered ground, standing at red with their wounds. The riflemen opened up with their BARs, light machine guns, and a 61 millimeter mortars. A 61 millimeter, show me with your hands how big a 61 millimeter mortar was.
A mortar, yeah.
Show me your hand, how big is it? A 61 millimeter mortar.
About probably 30 inches in diameter.
Well, show me with your hands. It's like this big?
Yeah.
This big?
Well, they got, when that shell goes off, it explodes and there's bolts and nuts and everything else in there.
So they loaded up with junk.
Yeah.